Now that all the new clubs are out and spring golf is here, we finished the Masters. It is golf season in pretty much the entire northern hemisphere at this point. A lot of people are talking about upgrading their golf bag. So let's talk about one of the most misunderstood parts of the golf club, the shaft. So before you walk into a shop and just start guessing, let's go ahead and break down what all the shaft labels actually mean. And more importantly, how they affect your ball flight. Also, I used to work for a shaft manufacturer, so I'll make sure I give you a little bit of insight that you probably won't hear during your fitting. Now, let's start with flex, because this is where most people are going to begin looking for their golf shaft. And this is where most people get misled. Now, there's no universal standard for shaft flex. A stiff in one brand can measure almost identical to a regular in another. And that's not just an opinion or a feel thing. That's just kind of how it works. So instead of thinking, I play a stiff flex shaft, think I'm somewhere in this general stiffness range. So let's actually break down some of the letters and what they mean on a golf shaft when you grab it, and what those flexes mean. We're going to start at the softest. We're going to work our way to the firmest. We're going to start with the L flex, or the ladies flex. It's often the softest, the lightest, the most flexible. It's designed to help generate speed, create a higher launch, get a little bit more spin. But look, don't get caught up in the label. It's going to be all about swing speed and transition, not necessarily the gender. So if you're a lady who swings it kind of fast, or maybe you're a little bit taller or a little bit stronger, maybe don't get the L flex. The next step up is going to be the A flex, also called an amateur flex, but most widely known as a senior flex. It's slightly firmer than the ladies flex, still designed to help get that ball in the air, and it typically fits a driver swing somewhere in the 80 to 85 mile an hour range. It'll generally add a little bit higher launch and a little bit more spin. Next up, where we get into where shafts start to kind of separate themselves beyond flex. You start to see a lot more options in terms of kick point, feels. Does this one feel stiffer? Does this one feel a little bit softer? This is where we start to see it, and that's with regular flex. This is, like I said, where you really start to see some real differences in the performance characteristics. Most shafts are going to offer a regular flex option in a bunch of different weights. And then next is probably the most popular shaft, the shaft that most guys maybe think they fit into or do actually fit into. And that's going to be the S flex, or the stiff flex shaft. This is designed roughly for 95 to 105 miles per hour. And I would have to say this is probably the most developed category in the market. Companies are going to design the majority of their shafts to fit into the stiff flex profile. You're going to see a lot of those differences in handle stiffness, tip stiffness, balance points. This is where those things really start to matter. And then once you get past that, you're going to venture, once you get over 105 miles an hour, you're going to venture into that X flex range, or the extra stiff. You might see an XS, you might see an X, something like that. And that, like I said, is going to be for those 105 mile an hour and faster. You're typically going to find these in heavier weights. They're going to be lower launch, lower spin, designed to help you control the ball a little bit more. At that speed, once you start getting up there, you're going to have some more problems controlling spin, and that's where it becomes the priority in how the shaft does that. And so they'll do a bunch of different things in order to control that spin. So past that, you start to see things that are faster than that. It's typically a TX, or a Tour Extra Stiff shaft. Those are very rare. Usually you don't find those in like the 60 grams or 70 grams. Those typically start to creep up, maybe in the 70 grams, but the 80 gram kind of shafts. So again, something to also remember when we talk about flex is that flex is not just about speed. I know I talked about regulars 85 to 95, 95 to 105 is kind of going to be your stiff, and then your extra stiff is going to be 105 plus. But it's also about how you deliver the club. And you actually see that with the TaylorMades this year. Their shaft, those React shafts, really talk about how you release the club, right? They have the red, white, and blue for different ways you release the club. They look at face rotation on foresight, so telling them how quickly you're turning it over. So it's all about how you deliver the club, not just about speed. If you have a smoother tempo, you can maybe get away with something a little bit softer, something you could swing a little bit faster because it's softer, lighter weight. Or if you're more aggressive and you have a little bit of a quicker transition, maybe you need something a little bit stiffer to help keep your timing consistent and make sure that it's not going too fast or getting out of control. So the next section we're going to talk about is going to be shaft weight. And I think this is probably the simplest way to kind of change your ball flight. So when we talk about shaft weight, we're kind of talking about something that is as impactful as flex, and the weight can even affect the flex of the club or of the shaft. Now, this doesn't need to be complicated, right? If something is heavier, it's harder to swing fast. That's it. And because of this, heavier shafts tend to slightly reduce your club head speed. We're not talking 5-10 mile an hour differences here, but it will slow it down a little bit. You will get that lower launch. You will get that lower spin. And often a heavier shaft improves your control and your consistency throughout your swing. Lighter shafts, on the other hand, increase that speed, right? If you're suddenly swinging or throwing something that is 50 grams versus 60 grams, you're going to be able to throw it a little bit faster. They increase your launch, they increase your spin, and they can feel a little bit easier to load and even release through the ball. Now, here's something that a lot of people miss when they're looking at weight. A heavier shaft will often play stiffer, even within the same flex, simply because you're not moving it as fast, right? If I give you an 80 gram stiff and a 60 gram stiff, the 60 gram stiff is going to give you a little bit more spin. You're going to swing it a little bit faster. It's going to launch a little bit higher, all because of those 20 extra grams. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it makes a big, big difference. So how do you know what the weight of your club is? Now, we talked about flex and how to read that. It's pretty simple. You look at the number that's on the shaft. So if it says like 6S, that is a 60 gram shaft or 60 gram class, because oftentimes there's 65, 66, 67 raw weight, but that's going to be the 60 gram class. If it's got a 5 and an S, you're looking at a 50 gram stiff. Maybe it says 7S. That's a 70 gram stiff flex shaft. Okay? So look at that, followed by the letter, or maybe it'll say like 6-S. That's a 60 gram stiff and all of that. Like I said, it doesn't mean it's exactly 60 gram. It just falls where it's in the 60 gram range. So anywhere from 60 to 68, 69 grams is going to fall in that 6 class. So how do we apply this to your swing? If you're struggling with your control and timing, maybe go a little bit heavier. Maybe that can slow you down a little bit. Are you struggling to create some speed or get more height? Go a little bit lighter. It's going to play a little bit softer. These simple changes here can make a bigger difference than people oftentimes expect. So let's look at the third section, kick point and bend profile. Now, this is where you can really start digging into the weeds a little bit, and we'll dig in a little bit into the weeds, but for this really basic video, we're going to talk about kick point and a little bit of the bend profile, but nothing too crazy there. So what actually separates shafts beyond just the labels? You may walk into a store and see a bunch of, you have a Diamana red, right? A Diamana white and a Diamana blue. Those are all different kick points and shaft profiles. So the two you'll hear is a low kick point, and that means higher launch, more spin, because if you look at it, it kicks down here, right? This part is the part that flares out. It goes, that this comes in a little bit more, so you get higher launch, more spin. It delivers with a little bit more loft. On a high kick point, it'll kick here and bring it like that. So you get the kick here. And so what that does is that's lower launch with less spin. But here's the part most people misunderstand when it comes to this. The shaft isn't actually bending in huge sections. So when you hear a high kick point, it doesn't kick up by your hands in the grip. There's oftentimes a really small portion, maybe an inch or two, that contributes to where it actually kicks. So in that 2-inch section, you will see a high kick point kicks at the top of those 2 inches. The low kick point kicks at the bottom part of those 2 inches. And where that kick point and where those 2 inches are is typically down by the head a little bit, maybe a 3 or 4 inches from the head. Now, it's a very subtle kick, but it does make a huge, it hugely affects the delivery at impact. Now, let's dig a little bit into bend profiles and what actually matters in them. Now, bend profile is how stiffness is kind of distributed throughout the shaft. You have the tip section, you have the mid section, you have the handle. And two shafts can both stay stiff, but perform differently, like I said earlier. You can have a softer tip section, which gives you higher launch, more spin. It'll make it often feel a little bit more active or lively. You can kind of feel it. I feel that way about Project X iron shafts, the flighted Project X ones that were really big in the mid or early 2010s. I really like the way those feel because I can feel it at the bottom, all kind of release at one time. If you have that stiffer tip section, lower launch, lower spin, feels tighter and a little bit more controlled. Now, if you have a stiff handle, let's say you get it really stiff in the handle. You look at that bend profile and it's very, very stiff in the handle. It may feel a little dead to you. That club may feel even stiffer than it actually is. It's often preferred by aggressive swingers or somebody who really comes in quick with their transition from the top down into their downswing. They want that stability kind of feel in their hand, so they will oftentimes look for that stiffer handle section. And this is why fittings matter and why not just picking a flex is enough once you get a little bit more serious. So I give you all of this information. I overwhelm you a little bit, but how do you actually choose a shaft? At the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. Now, step one is find your club head. You'll often hear people say the club or the shaft is the engine of the club and it affects everything the most. Any fitter I have spoken to that does not work at a place like Club Champion that really makes a lot of money off of their actual shaft fittings will tell you that most of your performance comes from the club head. And I truly believe that after everyone I've spoken to, the club head is the most important part of your club. And so you want to start there. Find the one that gives you the most ball speed, the most forgiveness, and get you pretty close with your numbers. You want to get pretty close with your initial numbers. And what you can do is use the shaft to really optimize everything. So after we get our club head, we want to kind of start neutral, right? Get something in the 60 gram range, get a regular or a stiff. Look at your club head speed, determine from there if you should start regular or stiff. And then get something that's kind of that mid-launch profile. Something that's got a mid-kick point. Something that feels kind of lively in the hands so you can feel it a little bit more. But we're going to start with the basics. 60 gram, stiff, mid-launch. From there, we can look at our ball flight, right? We can go, hey, wait a minute. It's flying really high. Maybe I can get something that is a little bit lower launching. Okay, perfect. I can move there. We can get heavier. We can get stiffer. We can get, like I said, a shaft that just has a lower launch profile. Maybe you're hitting it too low. You're launching it at like 10 degrees with 1400 spin. Well, we can look at the information and go, all right, maybe we can go a little bit lighter. Maybe we can go a little bit softer. Or maybe we really like the way this weight feels. We like how balanced the club feels, but maybe we just want to go something slightly higher launch profile, right? Okay, I really like the way this Project X shaft feels, or this Diamana shaft feels, or this UST shaft feels. I love the way it feels, but maybe they have a high launch version. that gives you a lot of the same profile. Maybe it just feels a little bit more active. So look at your ball flight. Anytime I talk about any kind of fitting or anything, I don't care about anything but my ball flight. I want to make sure that we are looking at the ball flight to make sure that the ball flight is what I'm looking for. And then trust your feel and your timing. That's going to be your fourth and final step. If you can't feel where the club head is, you lose it a little bit. Guess what? It's probably not the right shaft for you. If you feel like it feels like a sledgehammer and you're not doing a good job of swinging it, or you feel it takes you out of length, go a little bit lighter. Trust yourself. Trust what you're feeling. Because feel can really help you hit better golf shots, plain and simple. Now, the final section I'm going to kind of talk to you about is puring your golf shaft. What it is versus what it really does. And this is something that gets brought up a lot, especially when you start to see people who go to Club Champion or places like that to get club fittings done. And you hear this added thing that costs $30 and it's shaft puring. And if you've never heard of it, the idea is every shaft supposedly has a spine or a seam where the two sides kind of come together. If you align that correctly, the shaft will bend more consistently throughout your set of irons or on your driver. We can put the seam on the bottom side and that'll make it kick this, that. All of that sounds great in theory. But here's the reality. If you have a shaft that is performing that way and it makes such a big difference, you cannot orient it to make it, you cannot use the shape of the shaft to help you hit better golf shots. It's actually against the rules of golf. But from someone who worked inside a shaft manufacturer, we kind of laughed at that. We thought the idea of puring was funny because modern shafts are not built like that. They're not just a single sheet of carbon fiber rolled into a tube with one dominant seam where they try to figure that out. They're made from multiple layers of carbon fiber and something that are called flags. And those flags are cut in different shapes. We did triangles, you could do squares, you would do rectangles that go along the bottom part or anything like that. And then what we do is, what shaft manufacturers do is you put those flags in different shapes, you put them at different angles, and you layer them in very specific ways. That's really how shaft companies control tip stiffness, handle stiffness, and the overall feel and response of the club. One company I worked for, we wanted to reduce vibrations and make the club and the shaft reduce those vibrations so almost anything you hit felt soft. So what we did is we put a little bit of layer of rubber essentially in the handle. So when you hit it and you had that vibration, that rubber would reduce some of the vibrations. So we use those flags and the materials in the shaft. They use those to create the performance. And when you have things layered in different directions, there's not just one seam, right? If you ever see an unpainted golf shaft, you'll see that it is not one big giant roll. There is no seam. So if what we would do is if you wanted a more active tip, maybe you would use a softer material or you would orient it in a different way where what would end up happening is the tip would be a little bit softer. If you wanted that really, really heavy handle that felt very firm, you would add high carbon fiber, like high homogeneous carbon fiber in the handle, and it would stiffen up the handle and it would feel a lot firmer in your hand. So the idea that there's one single spine dictating how the shaft behaves is simply an oversimplification of a very much more complex design. So why does it exist? Well, some might say it's a fool's play at this point. It's a sucker's bet. But honestly, older manufacturing processes really weren't as consistent. Back then, what ended up happening, if you wanted a shaft to be stiffer, you would just add more and more carbon fiber to it, and then you couldn't get heavy and lightweight, or you couldn't get heavy and soft golf shafts. They always had to be lightweight because you were simply just adding carbon fiber. But now with modern manufacturing, they're much more consistent. Consistency is significantly tighter on them. Now, does peering do anything? Not really. Will it hurt your performance? Probably not. Is it necessary for most golfers? Also, no. They go out on tour, and yes, some guys on tour use it. But at the end of the day, those guys are playing for millions of dollars, and they don't have to pay for it. For a service that costs $35, $40, I think it's probably not worth it. So, just some final thoughts here as we wrap up. I hope this made it a little less complicated for you. But if you're a recreational golfer, don't overcomplicate it. Get the right flex range, get the right weight, and you're probably going to be in a pretty good spot, just getting pretty close. Now, if you're a better player chasing performance, that's kind of when we start dialing it in, right? Bend profile, launch characteristics, fine-tuning, feel, and your timing, and finding all of that. So how do you actually find the right shaft? Well, like I said earlier, the head matters more than the shaft. But you're going to want to find a club head that gets you as close as possible to those numbers: ball speed, launch, spin. The shaft's going to fine-tune it for you. And here's the part most people don't want to hear. If you're a recreational golfer, weekend rounds, maybe a couple of buck money game with your friends, for being honest, a stock shaft is probably the right choice for you. As long as it's right weight and flex, it's probably going to be your best option. And I'll be honest with you guys, there's a lot of R&D that goes into stock shafts. They test a lot of stock shafts, and OEMs will actually custom request a shaft to do a certain thing and perform a certain way with a shaft manufacturer so that it can fine-tune and work perfectly with the head that they are designing. So again, if you're a recreational golfer, a stock shaft in the right weight and flex is probably going to be your best option. You don't need to overcomplicate it. If you're buying pre-owned clubs, look at everything. Get something in the right weight class and flex range, and with the money you save, you could probably try a couple of different shafts over time and figure out what you like. That's a much smarter way to learn your game rather than dumping everything into a perfect setup, right? And trying to get it perfect right away. If you're buying pre-owned, go test 2 or 3 different shafts. Now, if you're playing competitive golf, maybe you're in the top flight of your club, or you're chasing every last bit of performance, you absolutely must have those final 2 yards, then go for it. That's when dialing in your bend profile, your launch window, your spin optimization, that's when it's going to make a measurable difference. But at the end of the day, the goal isn't to have the most expensive shaft or the most tour level setup. It's about having something you can feel, control, and swing the same every single time. So if this helped you understand what you're actually looking at when you pick up a shaft, that was my goal in this video. And if you want to go deeper, drop a comment below. If you want to talk specific shafts or you want to figure out what you should be playing, we can do that next. So until next time, hit them straight.